Hello and welcome to Faith in a Digital World here on TWR-UK. As many of you will have noticed, conversations about mental health are becoming more urgent, and increasingly those conversations are leading us back to our screens. From the moment we wake up to the moment we fall asleep, digital technology shapes our routines, our relationships, and even the way we think about ourselves. Social media amplifies comparison, constant notifications chip away at our attention, and the pressure to always be on is leaving many people feeling stretched thin. At the same time, technology offers us extraordinary opportunities, connection across distance, access to support, and new ways for churches and communities to care for one another. It's a landscape full of promise and complexity, and navigating it well has become one of the defining challenges of modern life. We're joined on the programme today by Steve Midgley from Biblical Counselling UK, and I'm hoping that he's going to be able to help us to make sense of all of this. We'll be exploring with him how the digital world is shaping our emotional and spiritual well-being, what counsellors are seeing on the front lines, and how we can try to cultivate healthier, more grounded habits in an age of constant connection. Steve Midgley, first of all, welcome to the programme. It's really nice to have you here. How would you describe the most significant ways digital technology is shaping our emotional and relational lives today?
The answer to that, I think, is inevitably it needs to be a very broad one. But I think the things that people seem to be identifying most are in the area of anxiety, in terms of the emotional impact. And that ties in with issues of distractibility. And I'm sure we'll go on to talk about this more, but the concerns particularly focus around preteens and teens and the impact in that cohort of people. But I think the other, you mentioned the relational impact. It is the paradox that more and more people are noticing, which is that we live in this hyper-connected age where we have more contacts, more opportunities to engage with other people more easily and more straightforwardly and more quickly than we ever have before. And yet the surveys seem to be indicating that people feel lonelier, that people feel lower in mood than they have in previous generations. And so you kind of immediately detect that something is going on that seems to not add up.
What kinds of struggles are you seeing more frequently in counselling rooms connected to all of this? Do you see this coming across your workload?
I'm not sure if I don't think people are coming and saying, well, there will be some people who identify an overuse of their mobile phone, of an over engagement with digital sort of channels of communication as a problem and seek help on it. But I think there'll be a minority. I think more often it's a background issue to a surge in mental health problems, particularly in the depression and anxiety zone amongst the under 25s, particularly.
Can we talk about that? Let's pick up on that in a bit more detail then, because like you, I've been reading a lot about some of the pressures facing young people. Barely a day goes by in the news at the moment without somebody suggesting that particularly under 16s should have smartphone bans or have the smartphones banned from schools. They shouldn't have social media, all of those kind of questions. You mentioned anxiety earlier on, and I'm really keen just to delve into this in a bit more detail, because when people like me, I hear the term anxiety, I don't really fully understand what it means. So can you give us a definition of anxiety and why it might be increasing when we look at people's social media use?
I think one helpful way to think about anxiety is to relate it to feelings of stress. And if you can picture a kind of a classic bell-shaped curve, then one of the ways that stress and performance are related is to say that at very low levels of stress or arousal, we might say, our performance is poor. As our arousal levels increase, so our performance increases. You're on alert now because you're doing an interview just as I am, and so we are aroused. We're thinking, we're sort of sharp. But clearly, if the level of arousal / stress increases, then performance begins to tail off. We're too nervous to perform well, and we begin to decline. Well, if you think about that sort of bell-shaped curve, then what we're saying when we're saying that people are in anxiety states is that it's over to the right-hand side of the bell-shaped curve. Levels of arousal, of feelings of stress are beginning to interfere with their functioning. Now, how that manifests itself varies hugely, from panic attacks to generalized anxiety states to obsessive compulsive disorders, to specific phobias. There are lots of particular ways in which anxiety states begin to interfere with living life satisfactorily.
Has any research been done into this? I often hear people talking about a connection between social media use and anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions. Do we actually know for certain whether social media is making people more depressed or more anxious?
Most of the evidence comes from kind of large-scale correlation studies, if you like, but the cumulative weight of it is huge. I mean, it's very, very hard to sort of. I mean, what we're not saying is, you pick up your phone for 10 minutes, and at the end of 10 minutes, you've got a spike of anxiety, and you put it down, and then 10 minutes later, you've got a lower anxiety. It's not that sort of sharp, immediate association. It's more of a longer term impact of changed habits of communication and relating, impacts on sleep that develop over years. And the studies that have particularly grabbed people's attention were a surge in depression and anxiety amongst teenagers, which seemed to happen globally from about 2012 onwards. And it grabbed people's attentions because in many different countries across the world, this phenomena was being noticed almost simultaneously. And the recognition that has come after that is to say, well, 2012-ish was roughly when mobile phone use became very globally available, and the use became commonplace amongst teens. And then the further studies have been to say, well, what is the impact? And probably the best known book that has come out about that, which has grabbed lots of attention, is Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. And it's a fascinating kind of read and study. He identifies what he describes as four impacts: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addictive patterns.
I'm interested that you've mentioned the Jonathan Haidt book there. Throughout the book, he has graphs and bar charts, and pretty much every one of them show that there's been an increase in young people feeling anxious or depressed since the smartphone was introduced. And I think that's definitely something that's worth focusing on. Now, I appreciate that throughout this interview, Steve, it would be really easy for you and I to criticize social media and question the various impacts that it's having. I want to try and give those listening, though, some practical pointers. What do you think we can do to try and improve our online lives? Do we need to switch off completely, or are there things that we can put into place that will help us when we're online not to get caught in doom scrolling or various other traps?
Yeah, I think I agree with you entirely. A kind of a Luddite position that says, goodness me, we need to get back to a previous age where technology wasn't a part of our lives. Is neither realistic nor reasonable. So the much better question is how do we develop better habits? And I suspect we will see big changes over the next sort of 5 to 10 years. I think having suddenly got excited about these mobile phones and the possibilities of them, I think now we're arriving at the point of saying, oh, hang on a minute, there seem to be some downsides here. And then I think there will be a resettling into a more measured and a more thoughtful use of them. I think there are some various practical things, and I'm sure your listeners will have thought of many of these already. But the decision to leave your mobile phone downstairs when you go to bed, to have your charger downstairs so it's not alongside your bed, would be a decision that some people might make. Wouldn't need to be everybody, but that would be one way. To having a default place in the house where you leave your phone rather than carry it around with you all the time. To make use of the digital wellbeing tools that most smartphones will have pre-installed, which have a whole range of functions. They don't just monitor your phone use and tell you, how long you've been on screen, as it were. They will have controls that are like app timers, that you can preset goals for the amount of time you're going to use a particular social media app, perhaps, that you find you're overusing. You can set times when those apps aren't available to you. And at that point, click on it and it's not going to open up. So that's preset by you. You can set a sleep mode that makes sure that it sort of interrupts. If you're somebody who scrolls into the evening, takes your phone to bed and then begins to scroll, actually it sort of, you arrive at your preset bedtime and it ceases. There are now devices and apps available that will interrupt your use of distracting apps. You can, and again, you can preset those and say, here are the apps that bother me, and I can just. There's one I saw which is just like a little physical card, and you tap your phone with it, and at that point, all of the apps that you've pre-decided are not going to be available to you are disabled, and they can't be re-enabled unless you tap again. So you can take that decision and then put the card somewhere else, use your phone without the distracting apps being used. So those are all ways that would help somebody who's really struggling in this area, and increasingly. My understanding is that more and more people are doing this, is switching from a smartphone back to, as it were, one of the old bricks, that really does not have any of the smartphone functions that we've become used to.
Yeah, a colleague of mine has one of those old Nokias, and I used to tease him endlessly about how the only interesting thing he could do on his phone was play the game Snake. But now, if I'm being completely honest, I have an Apple smartphone. Other brands are available. And I feel jealous of him sometimes, because when the notifications keep crawling in, or whenever I reach for my phone to check the notifications, I sometimes wish that I could just get a Nokia and get rid of it. But these phones, they become so deeply embedded in our lives. I was having a conversation with my wife the other day, and she pointed out to me that if I got a dumb phone, I wouldn't have access to my emails easily. I wouldn't be able to play chess, which is a guilty pleasure for me. I like to play chess on my phone. Taking photos of my relatively new baby, things like that I wouldn't be able to do on a brick phone. So there are so many challenges. I also spend time reading the Bible on my phone. And this is the next thing I want to talk to you about as well, because I wonder from a specifically Christian perspective, what kind of impact this kind of technology can have on our faith. Is that something that you've thought about much in the work that you do?
I think the distractibility is an issue that will affect every part of our lives, and I think that will include our spiritual engagement with the Lord. Undoubtedly, so simply becoming unfamiliar with protracted periods of kind of detailed concentration is going to make a difference, say, to our capacity to engage with the Lord in prayer over an extended period of time, because we're just not used to settling to things without the constant sort of feed of stimulation. So there certainly will be those elements, but I agree with you. I mean, I use one of the, an app to store prayer requests on my phone, and it's really useful. It's very cleverly designed, and it means that people that I've said, I'll pray for you, and they accumulate over time. I can have them on a clever rota, which means that they crop up every few months, and I'm prompted to pray again, and I'm really grateful for it. And I think it really has helped me to pray. If I only used that when I'm praying, then I think I would, I would worry about the style of prayer that encourages, and I want different styles of prayer when I am praying in a more kind of unstructured way and just engaging with God in a sort of over a longer period as I follow a train of thought. But again, I don't want to just sort of forget some of the positive things that we can find in here.
If you've just joined us, you're listening to Faith in a Digital World, a production from TWR-UK. On the programme today, we're joined by Steve Midgley from Biblical Counselling UK. We'll be getting back to him in just a moment. But before we carry on, let me remind you that all of our conversations so far are available for you to listen to again on our website at twr.org.uk/on-demand. That's the place to go to if you've missed anything in this series so far. And over the next few weeks, we'll be uploading new episodes onto that website. So keep an eye out there if you're interested in seeing the latest episodes of this programme. We're also going to be uploading some of these interviews onto the TWR-UK YouTube channel. So you can go to youtube.com/TWR-UK and you can find some of our latest interviews there. And of course, you can share any of that content with people in your church or any members of your family or friendship group that might be interested in these conversations. Once again, this is Faith in a Digital World. Our guest today is Steve Midgley from Biblical Counselling UK. Steve, thank you for staying with us there. If we have any listeners who are beginning to feel that they're overwhelmed by their digital life, what's a good first step for them to take if they want to try and regain some balance?
I think God sets in Scripture for us, doesn't he, a very clear rhythms of work and rest, as it were. And in all sorts of different ways, through the Old Testament, we see patterns of Sabbath days, of festival days, that interrupt the regular routines of life, punctuate them, to cause us to bring particular attention, or to cause God's people to bring particular attention on an aspect of his character or his the way that he's blessed his people. And I think I would take from that a pattern of saying, well, if we feel as though we have begun to sort of fall into rather stuck patterns in our social media use, then can we find ways of interrupting that? Might that be tech-free days? That we have a Sabbath when we decide we're not going to use our phone. How are we going to do when we come to holiday periods? We're off on vacation. We're going to be away. To in advance do some thinking, perhaps agreeing with other members of the family whether there's going to be a decision to radically reduce use of technology, and to anticipate that is likely to bring with it a little withdrawal spike. I'm aware of it in my own life because I am engaged with digital media, working with emails like the vast majority of us, through my working life, and to suddenly stop that and not be attending to that flow kind of feels strangely uncomfortable for a few days, and to anticipate that and then to press on through it, and then to remember, oh yes, this is what it feels like to not be constantly wondering if there are some emails that I need to be attending to, that I'm now in this slightly more relaxed state of mind without a constant sort of drip, drip, drip of nudges and stimulation to me. So I think those interrupting Sabbaths, and it needn't even be a whole day. It could be a decision that, this evening, my Tuesday evenings or my Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays, I'm going to put my phone to one side throughout the whole evening. Could just be that decision.
This is such a useful conversation. There is a really important question that I'd like to ask, because I guess pretty much everyone listening to this in some way in their lives is having to deal with some of the things that we're talking about today. But for some people, this has just become all-encompassing, and they may well be worried, very worried about the impact that it's having on their lives. Someone like that, at what point do they need to reach out for help?
I think I would say that even somebody who is less troubled than the person that you've just sketched out, I would say reach out for help, which doesn't need to be kind of like a kind of a panic call to a mental health line. I mean, it could be at its more extreme, but I think I'm thinking somebody who thinks I want to make a change. It's really helpful to recruit somebody else to be to somehow hold you to account, to encourage you, to ask you how things are going. If we're trying to make a change in a habit that we know has got a bit stuck with us, somebody outside kind of encouraging us and urging us on and checking up on us is incredibly helpful. And so I would think anybody who's trying to make that kind of shift is going to benefit from that. Clearly, there will be people for whom it has become so life-dominating that they may need somebody with a bit more measure of expertise in behavioural change. But that'll be the exception.
Throughout this series, I've spoken to a number of guests who have talked, some of them positively, about the impact that social media has had on their lives. In a few episodes' time, we're going to be talking to somebody who calls himself a Christian influencer. They're going to be talking about how social media and digital technology has completely and utterly transformed their lives, their career, and their walk with God. I've spoken to others who have talked about some of the challenges, particularly some of the issues facing young girls in the sphere of social media. And I've tried to ask a question all along the way. You mentioned Jonathan Haidt earlier, and his book is called The Anxious Generation, and he talks about the very real impact that this kind of technology is having on young people. So with all of that in mind, with everything that we've spoken about on the programme today, here's a question that I've been asking several of my guests. If I was to take you into a room and it had a huge red button, and if I told you could press that button and completely obliterate all social media, would you press it?
It's a very interesting question, James. It's a very interesting social experiment. I don't think I would, because I don't think that social change can happen like that. In other words, I think I think social change has to happen more gradually. And moving from where we are to the absence of social media would be so socially disruptive, it would itself become problematic. But ask me a slightly different question and say, do I think that the introduction possibly of some legislation that begins to exert some control in this area would be a good idea? And I think I'll give you a different answer. Because I think I've become persuaded, and I'll tell you a funny reason why I've become persuaded. I think I've become persuaded that actually legislation does help to change social habits. And it is the doggy poo bag that has persuaded me of this. Because I look back and I think, if you told me, I lose track of time. What is it, 15 years ago? If you told me 15 years ago that dog owners were going to carry around little plastic bags and pick up their doggy poo in a plastic bag, I would have thought you're mad. We're never going to persuade people to do that. But now it's utterly obvious. And if people don't do it, as a society, we're deeply outraged that they should be leaving their doggy poo everywhere. But it didn't, it used to be utterly obvious that, that was entirely acceptable. So it was a piece of legislation that changed that. And I don't suppose many people got prosecuted, but somehow it created a culture for change. And it's my sort of slightly tongue-in-cheek analogy to say that I suspect there may need to be some legislation that creates some boundaries. I haven't followed closely enough, the impact of the legislation in Australia, where they have banned mobile phones for the under 16s. I'd love to read a little bit more about how that, how the impact of that is panning out. But I think I lean in the direction of thinking something like that is probably needed. I'll tell you another. So I heard about a parent who confiscated their pre-teen's mobile phone for some misdemeanor. So it was taken away for 24 hours, and they had one of those multi-person WhatsApp chats on it. At the end of the 24 hours, there were close to 1,000 messages. Now, to just try and fathom what that is doing to a young person's mind, when that there is that volume of ping and attention grabbing, so that the distractibility and the fragmentation of attention is something that the psychologists are really worrying about. And I don't think anybody knows yet whether the rise in ADHD that also we are seeing, quite how those two things fit together, but that we need to look into. Are there connections? Seems clear.
This has been such a fascinating conversation, Steve. I'm so glad that you could join us on the programme today. Steve Midgley works with Biblical Counselling UK. Steve, I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you for joining us on the programme.
It's been a pleasure, James. Thank you.
I hope that you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. I mentioned earlier on our website, which is the place to go if you want to access this programme, to hear it again, or find out about some of the other conversations that we've been having in this series. You can go to twr.org.uk/on-demand. Just scroll down and search for Faith in a Digital World. You'll be able to see all of our episodes there. Please do feel free to share the links with any members of your family or church community who might be interested in some of the conversations that we've been having. You can also access some of the interviews for this series on the TWR-UK YouTube channel. We'd love to see you over there. Just go to youtube.com/TWR-UK. We'll be back at the same time next weekend with another episode of Faith in a Digital World. Until then, I hope that you have a really good week and continue reflecting on the impact your digital life is having on your walk with God. This podcast is a production of Transworld Radio UK. For more information, go to our website at twr.org.uk. UK.